Oh yeah, that's a beauty. I want to go deer hunting with my dad and grandpa next year, but they said I first needed to learn about deer as a species. Makes sense, right? So I did some research online, and now I'm scouting for deer. Oh boy, now I'm excited. I'm also excited at the thought of being able to complete hunter education and actually playing a role in wildlife conservation. I've learned that the wildlife populations are healthier now than they were 100 years ago. But that didn't happen without two things. First, we owe part of that wildlife success to America's pioneers in conservation. And then is today's conservation professionals who manage wildlife populations for everyone to enjoy. So grab your binoculars and hiking boots as we explore the history and future of wildlife management as we trek further into the outdoors. Ooh, there's a lot over there. You know, America's wildlife wasn't always this abundant. In fact, early settlers and market hunters thought that the herds of deer, elk, bison, and other wildlife would last forever.
So they used the nation's wildlife to feed the settlers. But that population doubled from 17 million to 32 million between 1840 and 1860. In 1870, market hunters killed an estimated 5 million buffalo that year alone. And by 1886, there were only 540 bison left in the entire United States, mostly in the Yellowstone area of Montana. America's wildlife was in serious trouble from a combination of human expansion, unregulated market hunting and habitat loss, and many wildlife species were on the verge of disappearing in many areas. But things began to turn around in 1872, when the outcry of early conservationists prompted President Ulysses S. Grant to establish our first national park, Yellowstone, that included over 3,300 square miles. Next, a politician, hunter, and conservationist named Theodore Roosevelt organized a group of hunters in New York to form the Boone and Crockett Club in 1887, with a mission of preserving the big game of North America. More and more people pushed for conservation of America's wildlife, and in 1900, Congress passed the Lacey Game and Wild Birds Preservation and Disposition Act that made it illegal to transport wild game taken illegally across state borders. Then in 1901, Teddy Roosevelt became president and spearheaded a new era of wildlife conservation. He strongly believed in protecting as much land as possible for wildlife and public use. During his presidency, Roosevelt helped protect wildlife and habitat by establishing 148 million acres of land in 16 national monuments, 51 wildlife refuges, and 5 national parks.
Finally, in the early 1900s, the concept of wildlife conservation was starting to sweep across the country.
In the 1930s, another hunter and pioneer in wildlife conservation emerged as the father of wildlife management. Aldo Leopold became the first professor of game management at the University of Wisconsin. He wrote the first book on game management, where he said that a combination of ethics and science should be used in wildlife management and conservation. What a concept! Leopold and his writings helped educate a nation about the importance of an environmental ethic. Leopold said that ethical behavior is doing the right thing when no one else is watching, even when doing the wrong thing is legal. And that's part of the ethical code that responsible hunters use today.
if you think about it, the world might be a better place if everyone did what Leopold said. Do the right thing, even when no one else is watching.
These pioneers in America's conservation inspired others and the U.S. Congress to pass the Pittman-Robertson Federal Aid and Wildlife Restoration Act in 1937. It created an 11% excise tax on all hunting firearms and ammunition, with the funds going back to the wildlife restoration projects, research, and education. So in the end, it's hunters paying those PR taxes, along with license sales that pay a huge part of wildlife conservation that all of us can enjoy. America's conservation pioneers, along with others, developed the North American Wildlife Conservation Model.
This model has two important principles.
First, our fish and wildlife belong to all Americans. And second, they need to be managed in a way so their populations will be sustained for future generations. And if you really want to learn more about it, including the 7 Sisters of Conservation, do your own online research on the North American Wildlife Conservation Model.
So that's the history of our wildlife management. Of course, the story doesn't end there. It's today's wildlife conservation professionals who continue to manage America's wildlife into the future.
So who are these people? What do they do? And could you become one of them someday? You're about to find out as we explore careers in conservation